Hey, everybody. Welcome to Reimagining Main Street, the podcast. I'm Laura Richards, and I'm here today with Patrick Lee, CEO of Spark Business Institute. Hi, Patrick.
Hello.
So, Patrick, we have heard a lot over the last 10 months how important it is to buy local. And I think there's a lot of awareness around supporting Main Street businesses, restaurants, and just our local community in general to keep our main streets thriving and vibrant. So I know the same can be said for community banks, and I kind of wanted to highlight why that is for folks today who may not know, and what community banks can do for area residents and businesses.
Yeah, remember, we're always talking that local economy, and the community bank is the banking institution for the local economy. I personally always bank with local community banks at this time, and that was a learned piece. And, the whole community bank is an interesting concept. The banking industry itself has experienced unprecedented disruption, from how you finance cars, right? You go to the dealer, the dealer's now in the business of financing. That used to be strictly something that would happen at a bank or a financial institution, right? And you've got industry disruptors like Rocket Mortgage or, even QuickBooks, which are giving out loans now, right? So there's a whole different way in which the banking industry, the finance industry is being played. Banking is basically becoming more commodified. But, we need to really think about this type of thing. Where do we want to put our money, and how much concentration do we want certain entities to have in controlling the money flow and what's going on? So, if you think about it, when we put our money into the big four banks, and the big four, by the way, are Chase, Bank of America, Citibank, and I think Wells Fargo. Yeah. That money isn't circulated back into our communities. That money is earmarked for investors, and it's also earmarked for those areas that are more prosperous markets, right, where they're going to make additional money. So the investment into that local community isn't real, right? They're making decisions not based on a local economy. But if you think about it, the community banks they're in that community. What they're doing is they're banking to the best deals within the community, which means they're going to take deals and they're going to finance things, that they're going to work on projects that may be completely ignored by those larger things. And 92% of banks are community banks, but they only own 18% of loan debt.
Yeah, that's a dramatic number there, which really represents the fact that the big banks go in, they take the funds of those communities and they reinvest them where they can get the best return, which really isn't in the community. Whereas the community banks, as you said, are financing mortgages, for example. It's a mortgages. If you guys, anybody refinanced over the past couple of years while the rates have been low, literally, like for us, it was 8 weeks later, a bank had bought our mortgage. Well, in a lot of these, backwater areas, those mortgages are not saleable. So it's the community banks that are making home ownership even something that can happen. So they serve underserved areas where, the big banks might close down a branch or downsize or have just very, very few staff. Community banks are really performing the kinds of services like helping people learn how to balance a checkbook, again, accessing those kinds of mortgages, contributing to the employment in the area, locally sponsoring events, and then requiring their employees to give back to the community, tons and tons of volunteer hours. So there's all the strength that comes from a community bank, not to mention, when you go for a loan from your dad when you're a kid and or your mom, and they say, well, here's what the terms are going to be, and are you sure you want to do this? Nobody's doing that at the car dealership when you go to buy a new car and you're 18 years old. But if you went to a community bank and they know your mom and dad and they kind of know your story and they're like, God, this kid's 18. I don't want to give him a 10-year car loan that he might be paying off and maybe he can't afford it. They're going to counsel you to the facts that they know. versus a car dealership who's going to say, yeah, we can get you in this brand new expensive car today, and you're going to be saddled with it for the rest of your life. So,
and I have a story very specific to that from a business standpoint. I was banking with a community bank, my favorite bank of all time. And I had gone in looking for financing from the bank. And that bank, they basically looked at all my stuff and they said, look, you don't fit into our template, our portfolio, what we can do. But we can see where you're trying to go with this. So why don't you let us bring in a whole bunch of different community finance folks and let's shop this, right? And so they brought in folks, they had me in there, there's a whole meeting, they ran it, and they got me the best possible outcome that they made not a dime from. That I mean, I was still banking with them as putting my money through the checking accounts and all, but the loan went to a completely different institution, but they brokered the best deal I could possibly get for my business, and they didn't make a dime from it. That would never happen at Bank of America.
absolutely not. That is a remarkable story, Patrick. And that was actually something that I heard when I sat on this community banking roundtable, where there were four banks in kind of a similar area. And they were talking about the spirit of collaboration in which they work. Because even though it seems like they would be competitive, one of them can't always do what their customer needs. And so meeting that, which is exactly what you're explaining, it's pretty incredible. You had another example, and I think we all have been hearing a lot about these PPP loans over the last, all during COVID, and we know some real success stories, and a lot of those came out of community banking. Tell us about yours.
Well, I think we have to go back and say that the vast majority of folks were going to the large big banks, the big four, the big five. And what was happening was a few of those banks, they actually published the stats on how much of the money that was applied for through PPP, each of the banks, how well did they do? And there was one particular large bank that did quite well. But then the rest of them had not great stats, 44%, 27%, that sort of thing. And I actually had a couple of clients who were banking with an unnamed large bank and were trying to get the PPP, and we're told our portal isn't up yet. Just hold on. We're getting everything set up. It should happen soon, right? And so they were told to wait. When the portal was finally up, they went in and they were too late for the first round. Now they did end up getting PPP money down the road, but initially they were horrified. They had been waiting on this bank. They ended up being led down a path that got them nowhere. In the meantime, my bank called me up before any of this was happening and said, "Are you planning on applying for the PPP?" And I said, "I believe so. Yes, that's something we think we need to do." And they said, "Okay, here's how this works. We've gone ahead and put together our own forms to shepherd this through. There is a form right now that's out there for the SBA, and we'll transfer everything for you. So if you fill out these forms and get them to us, we'll make sure everything gets done right, and we'll do this." And I said, "Are you calling all of your clients? I mean, is this something you routinely do?" And they said, "Yeah, we are going through all of our clients and we're calling them to make this thing happen." So that kind of service is not going to happen at a large bank. It's not. No matter how good your relationship is with the office manager at your Bank of America branch, they're not going to call all their customers, and they're not going to walk you through making sure that you do what you need to do for these services to work for you. So, I mean, complete difference from my client who was just beside themselves, thinking they weren't going to get PPP money. Now, in the end, they did, but in that initial time when they're panicking and this is happening, the big bank just let them down completely.
I got to say, it kind of reminds me in a way of local doctors versus very large practices, really small practices. It's like when you belong to a community bank, your banker. You can call them on the phone and say, "Hey, I did this and I'm having a problem with that," or "I'm logged out. Can you help me get my password to my online banking?" or whatever your issue is. oftentimes you don't know who to call at your local branch, and there's not even a direct number to the branch. You have to go through an 800. There's a rigmarole to it. So it's having a face and a name that knows who you are for your banking needs.
And there was a few smaller things that we were talking about. You were talking about how if you don't know how to balance your checkbook, going into the community bank and saying, "Hey, there's a problem here," they'll take you in one of those little offices and somebody will sit you down and they will help you balance your checkbook. I mean, and I still have the stories of making a mistake with a deposit and putting it in the wrong account, and now there's a bunch of checks about to bounce. Okay, now we all know, and I'm going to keep picking on Bank of America because they're my least favorite institution. But if that happens at Bank of America, there's nothing being done other than charging you fees. I still will get a call from my bank that says, "Hey, this just happened. We see that this other thing happened. Did you mean to do that? Because you're about to bounce some checks." And oh no, I didn't. Well, why don't you come in and sign this slip so that we can flip all this, this transactions so that you don't bounce anything. Thank you. I mean, thanks for looking out for me.
You and I talked about that. That really blows my mind. So, and here's another thing you don't see big corporate banks doing. How about banding together for the good of a community initiative? Case up in Berkshire, Massachusetts, where 16 bank branches, 4 big community banks, came together and created with the Schumacher Institute these Berkshires. And what they were is a local revenue, a form of currency. So each one of them costs just 95 cents, but it's worth $1. So it gives 5% back to the customer. They can be purchased at these 16 branches. It keeps the money local. And it was a way for them to collaborate to support the 400 different businesses that participate. It keeps the money flowing through them and their local economy going. It's great for ecology, sustainability, and for the community at large. And it was so well received that they originally rolled this out in 2006, and it is still going on. It does show you how these banks can collaborate with one another and really benefit the community, keeping that money in the community and also in the local businesses and institutions right there.
And so I think the thing to think about here, and this, it seems like, the theme is very much the same. And it seems like you're kind of saying the same thing, but this theme is real. And if you don't take the time to own this and understand it, then you don't actually influence or control what happens in your community. And so we're constantly talking about what is a local sustainable economic model, right? Local, buy local, and community economics, and worrying about not the big box stores that have invaded your thing, but the locally owned small Main Street stores. It seems like common sense, but when you look at the numbers, it's devastating if you choose to purchase everything in a Walmart versus purchase from a Main Street store. And here's the thing I think folks don't really understand. And this brought up, we were talking about the movie It's a Wonderful Life, and that whole idea of that scene. And it feels so quaint to watch that scene and go, well, that's not how it works now. And it isn't. But that sentiment is there, right? So here's what happens. Main Street businesses, they actually spend more on wages than large entities, right? And those folks live in the community. They now make more money. They now spend in the community. That whole thing works. And it seems simple to say it, but if you just, if you just acknowledge it and work on it, it has a huge impact. And the community banks play a role as a hub, right? They actually know the projects that are out there. The large banks, the way they work this is that they basically are so hyper efficient, keeping their costs down and all, that they remain profitable. And like you said, they reinvest their monies back into those markets that they're going to make more off of. But they're basically judging projects based on, how efficient it is and how profitable it's going to be. The community bank is choosing not from from these opportunities all over the country. They're choosing from the community, and they may be choosing the best projects that are going to have the best return or the most likelihood of success, but they are still choosing from that. And so they're more apt to know that looks good, but this particular person has failed miserably 15 times. That person over there has succeeded all these times. The numbers aren't quite there, but we will make a bet on it. And it's not that simple. I know that. But that sentiment is a huge, important piece if we are to band together and be sustainable local economies.
And I think what you're talking about, Patrick, is the responsible growth model. And who would know better where you can grow responsibly locally than the local bankers that deal with the local community and know the history and the story. One of the really wonderful things about community banking is that community banks are built over centuries and decades. They're embedded in the communities. And because of that, they have been a little bit harder to disrupt. So there are a lot of disruptors out there, like you said at the beginning of the podcast, with all of these, and it's still changing.
Yeah.
Even currencies are changing, and there are going to be more disruptors still. But the good news is that those long traditions of those banks are helping them stay in place. And hopefully, just like the buy local initiatives and the Main Street initiatives that we're seeing, a return to people, really trying to spend their dollars in their local communities, we will also see a trend toward people opening new accounts at these community banks and choosing to put their money there.
Absolutely. So bank local, right?
Hey, bank local. Yeah, local investment. Those compounding effects, you can make a change with where you have your bank account.
And you should. I think if you gave it a try, the customer service alone will convince you that it was worthwhile to do.
I think we've said it all. Hopefully this has helped you all understand the importance of local community banking and how those relationships can benefit you in your life and your business. Thanks for joining us for this podcast of Reimagining Main Street, and we'll see you soon.
Bye, everybody.